In this part of the animated news website series, we are going to focus on animating the size of the top nav bar based on how we're scrolling on the page. If you haven't already, check out the previous part of this series linked on screen and in the description down below. And with that, let's jump in. Now let's turn our attention to the navigation bar and animating the size of this navigation bar based on how we're scrolling. Now to do this, we're going to first set up a new function in the navbar file. And so here I'm just going to go to the very top. And then I call this function useBoundedScroll. We'll take in a value of bounds. The idea of this function here is to kind of track how we're scrolling in the page. And then what we'll do is we'll connect that up with then the visuals of the navbar, the styling of the navbar to have it dynamically adjust based on the scroll. As some of you might know, Framer Motion has a built-in hook called useScroll, which helps us track the scrolling that on the page pretty easily. We're going to use that, but we're going to build on top of it because in this case, we don't just want to know absolutely how far we've gone down the page or even how far we've gone down a specific element on the page. But what we're really going to care about here is the relative scrolling that we're doing, because we actually want to tie this navigation bar to, relatively speaking, how we're moving. So when we scroll down, we want it to shrink. But as soon as we start scrolling up, no matter where we are on the page, we want it to start growing back to its original size. And so this is where this useBoundedScroll is going to help us here. So for that, let's start with using the useScroll hook from Framer Motion. So I'm going to say let scroll y, which we're going to extract out of useScroll. I'm then going to create a new variable called scrollYBounded. And we're going to set this to a motion value of 0 for now. This is what we're going to use for that, again, relative scroll position. And then accompanying that, we're just going to make a scrollYBounded progress value. So this will be just the 0 to 1 version of scrollYBounded. And for that, we say use transform. We're going to tie this to the scrollYBounded value. We're going to say scrollYBounded is going to be between 0 and bounds. So that's from the whatever we input into this function. And we're going to map that to 0 to 1 for the bounded progress. Great. So we set up those variables. Now we need to actually dynamically update this scrollYBounded because right now it's just set equal to 0. And so for that, we're going to say use motion value event. So we're going to track when scroll y changes, so the change event. And then we're going to pass this function in, how we're going to handle that using the current value of scroll y. So first we're going to get the previous value of scroll y. So with scroll y get previous. We're going to calculate how much we've scrolled, what's the difference we've done. So that's the current minus the previous value. And then we're just going to say new scrollYBounded equals the current scrollYBounded value. So scrollYBounded.get plus diff. We might say, why don't we just directly add diff to scrollYBounded and call it a day? Well, it's because we need to make sure to bound this value based on the bounds that we've been inputted into this function. So first, we're just going to do the addition, and then we're going to do scrollYBounded.set. And this is where we're going to apply the bounds. We're going to use a function called clamp from Framer Motion to help with that. And so here we're going to say we need to make sure that this value is between 0 and bounds. And then we're going to use use scrollYBounded. So essentially this will say what clamp does is it says it's going to set it to the value of new scrollYBounded, but if it falls outside the range of 0 to bounds, it will clamp it to one of the edges, depending on which one is closer. So in this case, it'll max it out at bounds for us. Finally, for this function, we're just going to return scrollYBounded and also the scrollYBounded progress. And remember, scrollYBounded progress is tied to the value of scrollYBounded, so it will also dynamically adjust as scrollYBounded updates as well. So we have the scroll tracking set up. So now let's start attaching this actually to the actual navbar component. So I'm going to go here to the navbar component, and at the top, I'm going to pull in scroll Y bounded progress from what we just created, and we're going to set this equal to use bounded scroll. And for now, let's just set it a value of 100. So this is saying we're going to track the relative scrolling to be within 100 pixels. This is a value you can change that will adjust kind of the speed of the animation and how quickly it collapses and expands. And then we're going to create a new value here called dynamic font size. So currently, as you can see here in the navbar, the main sort of logo in the navbar is actually right now just an H1, this H1 here. And so we're going to tie the font size of this H1 to the scroll Y bounded progress. Now you could easily see here, if you had an actual logo that was an image, you could, for example, tie the height of that image to scroll Y bounded progress. But for now, we'll set it to the font size. So here I'm going to do that calculation here. So dynamic font size, again, we'll use transform. And we're going to say, well, this is going to be based on scroll Y bounded progress. We know it will be between 0 and 1, the progress value. And let's map this to, let's say, 1.5 rem and 1 rem. So when scroll Y bounded progress is 0, we'll set the font size to 1.5 rem. And when it's 1, we'll set it to 1 rem. And then finally, we now just need to attach this to the H1 tag. So for that, I need to first make this H1 a motion H1. Import motion. And then finally, we're just going to set the font size to dynamic font size. Okay, not sure why it's doing that. Dynamic font size. We'll hit save. And let me just refresh this page. But you can already see it's actually already started doing what we wanted. So now you'll see scroll Y progress is 0, obviously at the very top, and you'll see the font size is now at the 1.5 rem. And now as I scroll, you can see it's nicely, smoothly shrinking until it gets to 1 rem. And you can see as soon as we hit the 100 pixel scroll limit, it hits the smallest value of the logo, and then we'll keep it at that value. But then as soon as I scroll up, even if I scroll all the way to the bottom, as soon as I scroll up, because it's tracking the relative scrolling, it will start expanding again until it hits the maximum size, and will stay there until we get to the very top. In the next part, we will work on creating an animated scroll progress bar. I'll release the next part 1 week after this video is up, so be sure to get subscribed to get notified when it's live. I'll also link it on screen once it becomes available, and I'll see you there.